Hello everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar on recent development in neuroplasticity. This webinar is being organized by United Scientific Group, a Texas-based non-profit organization. I would like to welcome the first speaker, Dr. Michael Merzenich from brainHQ USA. Dr. Michael Merzenich is the Francis Sooy Professor in Neuroscience and Otolaryngology at the University of California at San Francisco, and he is also a founder and the chief scientific officer of three brain plasticity based therapeutic companies: Scientific Learning, Posit Science, and Stronger Brains. Dr. Merzenich led research team that created the modern cochlear implant and that initially translated the science of brain plasticity into game-like tools designed to improve the brain health and brain powers of struggling child and adult populations. He has authored nearly 400 research reports and several books and has been awarded more than 60 US patents. He has received many international awards for his work, and he is a member of both the National Academy of Science and National Academy of Medicine. I welcome Dr. Merzenich to give a talk on progress in applying brain science-based tools for managing organic brain health.
And I want to say at the outset that the research I'm going to talk about, which is going to summarize some progress in applying brain science-based tools for managing brain health, was conducted with the participation of hundreds of scientists and clinicians. And I want it to be understood from the outset that this is all team science, and that when you see some report about this research from out there in the world, and there are numerous reports that relate to this from this team, but there's almost always a person's name up front, and that's almost always a person younger than me, because that's almost without exception necessarily the case. But in any event, you should give that person primary credit. Many wonderful, intelligent people have contributed to this, and they should be given credit for their role, their part that they've played in this important research. I also want to say that this is a very complicated scientific arena. As I'm going to talk about in a minute, there are literally hundreds of thousands of research reports that relates to this science. It's very difficult to present it in more than a fly over the top of the forest kind of way. I'm going to try to talk about this science in relation to what matters from the point of view of most immediately from the point of view of thinking about its translation to the benefit of human populations, to humans in need, humans who struggle. And that'll be the emphasis today. We take a sort of a different approach from most people that focus on improving brain power or improving brain health. And this really comes from the fact that our models are neuroscientific models. So we didn't come originally from psychology or from a psychological perspective, although of course we're strongly influenced by it, because psychologists over a long period of time have tried to understand how the brain is operating, you could say, by empirical investigation and study. But actually over time, neuroscience has been defining the rules of operation of the brain in its real terms. That is to say that we now understand what controls brain change as we live in a life, as the brain is changing by our experiences, as the brain is changing when we learn or when we train. And with that understanding, basically understanding those rules, we now understand how to control the brain to change, you could say, at will. And one of the very important things that comes from that understanding of rules is that we know that basically the fundamental operations of the brain are established by use. So when you're born, the brain is a relatively primitive machine, and it's resolving information in a relatively primitive and limited way. And as we engage it in a life, we refine and specialize its operation. The sum of those specialized operations is us. It's the operational person that we are. We need to refine the operations of the system as systems of the brain at every level. And this is one of the things that distinguishes us from what most people do or how most people think about or approach changing the brain by engaging it in training. And we're engaging it in training, you could say, from the most elemental aspects of its operations, as it's resolving the details of what's receiving from hearing or from vision or from a somatosensation from wherever. And basically, only when those, or to the extent to which that resolution is powerful and salient, can you basically make the wonderful things from it that contribute to the evolution of the person that you are, that actually contribute to the evolution of the executive, to the controlling power or force, to the agency of the brain. So we're basically trying to control the brain and improve its operations, you could say, at every level, from the most elemental aspects of its operations to the most sophisticated operations. And we're doing this because this is what brain science informed us to do. We did many, many experiments in animal and human models to understand that this is the most powerful way in which we can change the brain to the advantage of the person who is struggling or who could be advantaged by that change. So we fine-tune perceptual systems, which are the elemental building blocks of cognition. The brain has to operate with high accuracy at high speed in its most elemental operations. We have to engage the machinery that actually controls change because it's plastic. The only way you can have an effective learning brain is by having a brain that's set up to learn, because the machinery that's controlling change, in fact, is in a powerful, and it's in a positive state. You have to move upward to attention and working memory, to memory acquisition and retrieval, to problem solving, planning, reasoning, decision making. You have to not create the executive, and then you basically have to empower the executive to establish powerful agency and control. And basically you have to translate all of these out into things that impact the quality of life. So the science behind what we do, I think, makes us this approach from the training that's embodied in what we call brainHQ. It's pretty unique in the field because it's science dominated. So this has all been created by collaboration with scientists across the world. There are tens of thousands of published studies on neurological processes that underlie remodeling that relate to what we're doing. This is not a mystery. It's not something we invented. It's not somebody anybody invented. It's something that came out of the science. These translational tools have been applied to help millions of normal and neurologically struggling children and adults. We collaborate with several thousand scientists, therapists, and medical doctors as I speak in more than 400 universities in more than 20 countries. We published almost 200 RCTs, that is to say I mean scientists that we've collaborated out in the world. And we actually have 383, I counted them last week, ongoing RCTs that we're supporting out in the world. Unfortunately, all slowed down by the coronavirus, but they'll all get done. And basically, we have neurocognitive and functional and brain imaging outcome measures in study after study after study after study. We have about more than 60 historic US patents, and we still have a significant number of those patents that are in use. Our commercial reach makes us unique. We're available on popular web browsers and on tablets of all sorts in English and across 10 languages, not enough, but 10 is the 10 dominant languages in the world, you could say. And then it's accessible to millions of individuals across the world, many of them for free. We've been endorsed by the National Institutes of Health, who stated that our training drives improvements that are significantly better than other types of cognitive exercise. I want to emphasize that training gains are impartial to indication. The brain is plastic. It changes when you use it drive it in use in an appropriate way, in an understandable way. It's predictable. We understand the rules that govern change. In almost every clinical condition, we understand how the brain is limited or distorted in its operations. This is not guesswork. And if the brain is alive, if you have one, it's plastic. It can be modified. It's subject to change. And the trick is to guide that change in a positive or useful direction. It's not a mystery how to do that. So it's not a surprise that you can apply it in condition after condition after condition. Look at the weaknesses that are applied to that condition, and then drive changes in a strengthening or improving direction. This is what we're trying to do. in condition after condition after condition. So it's been applied to address neurological losses associated with normal and pathological aging. Now, in normal aging, of course, the goal is to continue to grow in life, to continue to improve your powers, not to retreat, not to retract, not to gradually progress in a degrading or declining direction, but to grow. And you have the power to grow because you have the power to control, you have agency to control your own, in a sense, selfish, positive neurological plasticity. But also, we're very concerned, of course, about people that are struggling in their elder life, struggling because their losses have put them on a progression towards Alzheimer's disease or other dementias, towards Parkinson's disease or other untoward vicissitudes in life, and there are innumerable vicissitudes that can apply. And again, in every population in which these training strategies have been applied, they benefit people demonstrably. We see statistically and significant improvements or advantage gained by their application. We also have intensively studied brain changes underlying psychiatric illnesses. There's more than 60 RCT studies of the impacts on schizophrenics or schizotypic individuals alone that have been published by scientists that have worked with us. We've also looked at the impacts of this training in a beautiful RCT in bipolar study, in people with major depressive disorders, substance abuse, body dysmorphia, other neurological conditions that relate to the psychiatric spectrum of problems that arise in humankind. I might say many of these studies actually relate to prevention, to strengthening, to increasing resilience so that someone at risk for a progression to schizophrenia or to another episode of bipolar illness or to another period in their life where they might be subject to reintroducing substance abuses or to depression or whatever. We're trying to strengthen people, you could say, when they're in a safer period or before the onset of a condition, so that we reduce the probability that they fall into another cycle of self-destruction. We've looked at impairments that are secondary to physical disease, diabetes, kidney disease, heart failure, genetic conditions, stroke, multiple sclerosis, aftermath of ICU delirium that affects several million people in the US alone every year. And so in every one of these conditions, there are neurological consequences. There are neurobehavioral consequences. There are quality of life consequences. And we're trying to address those secondary aspects of these conditions or diseases, you could say, or it could be primary, as in cases of stroke or multiple sclerosis. We're trying to address them by directly engaging the brain to strengthen it, to improve its operation, to improve its powers. We also have been studying neurological losses that are associated with, I can't read my own sentence there, but I know that I'm talking about brain trauma, brain damage, or infection, or poisoning. And we look at a variety of conditions like this, and again, in every case, we see very positive impacts in a corrective or strengthening direction that comes from intensive brain training in this form. We've looked at childhood and adult impairments that frustrate success in school and in life. The burdens of adverse childhood experiences is a very intense interest of ours now. We've looked at children in the autistic spectrum disorder, and we can almost always substantially improve their situation by intensive training. We can help children overcome ADHD and other attention-related disorders, conduct disorders, addiction, psychopathy, spousal abuse, parolee reintegrate. These are all things that are directly, you could say, understudied in different places in the world as I speak, and are intensive subjects of interest to us. And finally, doesn't really relate to failures in life. It relates to successes in life. We look at, importantly, at, you could say, real life things that are really important to a person in their life in the domain of their interest or hobbies or on the job. And control studies have been conducted to try to help people on the job in law enforcement, as professional drivers, as athletes, as special forces, military individuals, as technical workers and high-risk workers. I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later toward the end of my talk. Now, I just want to emphasize, and I've done this very slowly and clumsily, I just want to emphasize that it doesn't matter what your problem is neurologically. If you have a neurological problem, you will be advantaged by having a stronger brain. You will be advantaged by having a brain that operates at a higher performance level. Again, you'll be advantaged by being assessed to determine where your weaknesses lie. And then by addressing those weaknesses, you could say by intensive training. This is not an area of mystery. This is all resolvable in a logical and intelligent way by considering basically what's wrong and then using this incredible, powerful gift of plasticity that we're all endowed with to drive changes in our neurology, you could say, in a corrective direction. Now, I'd like to say that training is not just limited to changes in the wiring of the brain. And a strong emphasis in neuroplasticity studies that this is what you're talking about when you're talking about neuroplasticity. But it's actually much more than this. And it's been understood to be much more than this by studies that were conducted by physiological psychologists beginning 50 or 60 years ago. Because they began to look beyond wiring. They began to look beyond the basic sort of elemental neurological operations of the brain to the brain more widely considered from the issues of its operations and health. The brain is a physical organ. It's a physical organ that operates on the basis of its physiological operational principles and its chemistry. And almost every aspect of it is subject to change by use. It's like the body. I engage the body in physically important, in appropriate ways, and I have a stronger body for it. I have a healthier body for it. And everything that supports its actions, everything that supports its physical operations are strengthened by that engagement, by its engagement in my physical behaviors, in those appropriate exercise forms. So too the brain. Appropriate exercise of the brain drives everything to change for the better. Now, one of the ways we've studied this is by giving an animal model. These are not experiments that we can easily do in a human at the outset. We give an animal a very difficult early life. So mostly we limited these studies to rodents like rats because we did not want to perform these experiments in primates or more advanced animals. So we did these initial experiments in rodents, actually in wild Norway rats. Or we looked at and then we compared that animal as it grew to young adulthood to an animal that had a normal, healthy, vigorous life. In another variation, we looked at an animal near the end of life, expected to die not too many weeks forward from when we studied the animal. And we compared various aspects of the physical and functional operations in the brain of the animal to the animal in the prime of life. And ultimately, we looked at about 30 different indices, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And we compared them to the animal near the end of life, or an animal that had struggled very substantially in earlier life with an animal that had a good life, now looked at in the prime of life. And the first question we asked was, how many of these 30 indices of brain function or brain operations and health are different when you're not too far away from the end of life, let's say, when the animal is obviously struggling, from when the animal's in the prime of life? And the answer is everything's different. Every indices is substantially different. And then you can say, well, how many of those things advantage the older brain? And the answer is nothing advantages it. In every index, by every measure, the younger brain is faster, more reliable, more intact, more physically elaborate, more physically and functionally powerful. Younger is better by every measure. Then we ask the third question. Well, how many of these things are reversible by engagement in training. I might say we didn't go into these experiments blindly. We knew that many of them were reversible because we knew the rules that govern brain change. We knew that if we engaged the brain in an appropriate way, we should be able to drive many of these things back in a rejuvenating or strengthening direction. But it turned out, somewhat to our surprise, that everything was reversible. That every one of these 30 measures, by every one of these 30 measures, you could drive the brain back in a direction substantially in a rat, in most of these measures, all the way back to the performance characteristics of the brain of an animal in the prime of life. So here are some of the things that could change and that were modified by engaging the animal near the end of life. It remyelinated. It re-elaborated its dendritic and axonal arbor branches. This has already been known by beautiful studies that have been conducted 20 years before this in physiological psychology. We saw an increase in inhibitory neuron numbers and morphologies. We saw them look very much more like the way these special neuronal populations appear in a young brain. We saw a reduction again in mini-column size. Mini-columns are the functional units that are controlling processing in the brain. There's 300 or so million of them in a young brain. Very dramatically altered when the brain ages. And now they're back in a youthful state with small neuronal consistencies, very sharply bounded. We see a recovery of representational orderliness of information in the brain. We see a recovery in a whole series of measures in brain chemistry, in the expression of trophic factors, in the subunits that appear on receptors that are controlling synaptic transmission, in the neuromodulators that are actually controlling plastic change in the brain. It's all recovered. We see a recovery of neurotransmitter transporters that are shipping information to those neuromodulators around in the brain. On brain defense, we see a recovery of blood-brain integrity, the barrier between the blood compartment and the brain compartment, which leaks in an old brain, leakage which results in the formation of amyloid bodies. We see it's actually plastic. You can actually restore its integrity by training the old animal. We see microglia-based immune response re-strengthened. We see a norepinephrine or noradrenaline expression recovered. We see all kinds of things related to nutritive support recovered. We see the blood flow response as a function of activity recovered, supported by an astroglial cell branching and end feet re-elaboration. We see a recovery in brain function expressed by processing speed and sequential processing recovery, response power and reliability recovery, complex feature representation recovery, system connectivity and feed-forward power recovered. Everything we look at is restored to a youthful level. So just a few specific examples. If you just look at the formation of new myelin, and this is an example from a classic study that was led by Etienne de Villers-Sidani.
La medicina a través de la neurotoxicidad que se está generando. Alguien joven, alguien viejo, entrenamiento.
Who's now a professor at the Montreal Neurological Institute at McGill University in Montreal. Basically, you see in an old animal, very little myelin is being made, produced anymore, and basically its production is reinvigorated by training the animal. And if you train the animal enough, you can match the level of restorative myelin production to the level that you see in a young, vigorous animal. And here's a second example that's non-neurological. This is from a study in which de Villers-Sidani evaluated the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. Now, what you see when you see the diffuse green in the background is a dye, which is leaking through a leaky barrier. And basically, you completely restore the integrity of the barrier by training the animal. I might say you can also train the animal in another way and open the barrier. And when you do that, what you see is accelerated aging. All of these things, all of these 30 things change in a negative direction. This is all reversible plasticity. And here's a third example. I can't see it because there are heads in the way. But basically, this is a critical population of inhibitory neurons that are controlling aspects of the temporal coordination of responses in the brain. There are very few of these neurons that are operationally effective in the old animal, and their numbers can be completely restored by appropriate forms of training. In fact, those, more than 30 specific indices of brain health were restored to a youthful status by training. Now, we've been systematically documenting the reversal of age-related human neurological decline in a variety of ways, and I'll just want to talk about one simple example, and that's to emphasize something that's really important in the brain, and that's brain speed and accuracy. And if you just look at brain speed by a variety of measures, you see that it systematically declines in the average older human. These are from studies that were conducted, classical studies by Tim Salthouse, a great University of Virginia professor in the United States. And you can see from roughly your 30th birthday forward to the end of life, there's a steady, slow average drop in brain speed. Brain speed is really important. About half of the variation of adaptive intelligence is accounted for by variation in brain speed. Brain speed is a contributor to almost every aspect of higher brain function, and it's actually critical index of how well you're supporting the operations of the executive in the brain. Very highly correlated with the executive powers in an individual. You can see that a whole series of other things are also declining with brain speed. I could put 30 things on this list, but here in this study, reasoning, spatial visualization, episodic memory are all shown to decline at about the same rate. Now, it really doesn't matter if you're a highly advantaged individual, except that your function would be represented by a line that's higher than this. That is to say, it would take longer than you to decline, but a generally average older, let's say, university professor is on the same trajectory. You can see that there's one curve that's a little different, and that's really reflecting the accumulation of knowledge, in this case, vocabulary. And you can see that it continues to grow until an individual is 60, 65 years old before it flattens. So of course, there is a value to being around for a while if you're the average human being. But I might say, none of this has to happen because all of these operational characteristics are reversible. Now here's a simple example of the reversibility. This is from training in a speeded multitasking exercise called double decision. It's a useful field of view training exercise. And what you see in the red dots is the performance as a function of age. People here are extended from age 20 to about age 90 before training. And you can see just as in, this is another expression of what happens in brain speed, in this case, up is poorer. And now we train everybody. And what we see in the blue dots for this equivalent amount of training is an improvement of performance that's seen, improvement seen at every age. That's roughly equivalent. And now if we look at the improvement for an individual that's 60, in my case, there's a black bar across my screen just where I'd like just where this important information is that I'm trying to show you. But it turns out the performance of an individual at age 70 is equal to the performance of an individual that's untrained at age 20. Now I could show you 30 plots like this, in which I show you some elemental ability that reflects the physical or functional characteristics of the brain. And I could show you basically the same outcome, that ability after ability is recoverable to a youthful state by a relatively limited period of intensive training. Now note that a speed of processing measure is actually providing an important indicator of the brain's performance abilities and its organic health status. Because when you change it, all of those other 30 things changed as well. Now I want to emphasize that it's not just as simple as changing it by a single task or by a single operation, because actually to change it brain-wide, you need to drive speed of processing changes at multiple levels in the brain. But when you do that, everything changes with it. All 30 indices of brain health change with it. Performance gains in attention and speed must arise from a coordinated series of brain rejuvenating physical changes. Training gains transfer to everyday life. And one of the things that really drives me crazy are the claims from a series of reviews from reviewers of the use of brain training tools that changes do not extend in a positive way beyond the thing that is directly changed. What you have to understand is that we know from the science that when you drive changes in the brain by these strategies, you're actually changing the processing machinery of the brain, and you're actually changing the organic health of the brain. And of course, this has generalizable consequences. Now, most of them are never measured. For the most part, in a study, we're limited to looking at one or two things of near and far transfer. And about half of the time, depending upon how well the study is designed, one or both of those things are changing in a positive, highly significant positive way. Now, these are just a few examples of things that have been demonstrated to change by limited epochs of training. Now, you train a person in a particular speed-related visual task, that's a divided attention-related task, and you cut in half the incidence of at-fault motor vehicle crashes. You improve everyday functional abilities. You can improve attentiveness, improve distractor suppression. You can literally get children past their ADHD or adults past their ADHD. You can improve skill acquisition or learning rates. People can learn elementary tasks, twice as fast after a period of training as before. You can improve locus of control, how well people are in control of their life, feel secure and safe in their life. You can improve healthcare quality of life by objective measures. You can delay the onset of age-related depression. You can reduce depressive symptoms. You can decrease healthcare payer-related costs. And you can decrease the incidence of dementias by 29 to 48% in the decade after a training period epoch that extended over no more than 16 hours. Person works on over 16 hours, most of it in the first year of training, a little more in the second, a little more in the third year of training, and then over the next 7 years, you cut the incidence of dementia in half. Now that's called far transfer. That's called a general positive impact of training the brain that impacts quality of life in a very fundamental way. Now, I'd just like to end by talking about a few examples of important advances over the past 2 years. And the first is the mystery solved. And that's we know that when we look at the pathology in the brain, it doesn't really account for the fact that the neurological status of the person that we relate to their dementia or defines their dementia or the Alzheimer's disease. More than half of the variability is accounted for by something else. And basically, it's usually been blamed on something we call a lack of cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve is something that advantages people that have a rich and a powerful use of their brain through life with relatively limited vicissitudes in life. They have these extra powers, basically, that sustain them in life. So what is cognitive reserve? Well, I very strongly believe that we now understand what it is. It's not mysterious. It's organic brain health. The brain is an organ that varies in its organic health, of course. And the majority of people at an older age have an unhealthy brain. It has not been exercised, it has not been engaged, it's flabby. It's basically weak in its operations. It's unhealthy because all of these other assets that relate to it, how well it's supported by the vasculature, just like your body, how well it's supported by all other functions that relate to it, are downregulated, are degraded in operation. Cognitive reserve is simply an index of organic brain health itself. Mystery solved. Why did those intensively trained animals live so much longer? So when we train animals intensively, near the end of life, they were supposed to die, but they didn't die. Their life was actually extended by about 40% with no further training. Why did they live so long? Well, in a beautiful study conducted by Van Key Lin et al., recently reported in Neuroimage, Van Key Lin is a professor in nursing at Rochester University School of Medicine. She demonstrates strong effects on autonomic system regulation that come from training. Training using strategies in which you recover speed of processing and other abilities. Basically, you restore brain health in an individual by using these intensive training strategies, and you recover autonomic nervous system function. Autonomic nervous system function is basically something that fails us when we fail physically in our organic bodies on the path to that second life or other life or no life, near the end of life. Now, we strongly believe that this is a major contributor to increasing longevity. Mystery solved. How could intensive training so dramatically slow down the progression to Alzheimer's disease and dementia? Well, it's really all about organic brain health impacts, including those facets of training or those factors in training that were not strictly neurological. And it's all about growing your cognitive reserve. If you drive the brain in ways that change its elemental functionality, you're changing its elemental physicality in ways that contribute to a restoration of organic health. You have to train in appropriate ways. But if you train in the appropriate ways, you're actually, a limited period of training can have a dramatic effect on the progression of the brain toward trouble, towards the cliff. Mystery solved. Gee, I can't even read this, and I have this black bar across my, I don't know if you have the same black bar. I think what it says is that how could our army of internists and GPs not be including a definition or determination of brain health as a routine part of medical examination? Why, in 2020, is there still no brain medicine? You go to the doctor and the doctor says, "How are you doing, Faize?" And you say, "I guess I'm okay." Well, you just had your annual brain exam. Why is the doctor not concerned about the organic health of your brain? That's nutty. Every time you go to the doctor, there should be an evaluation of the basic status of the health of your brain. And on the basis of what the doctor sees by a simple evaluation, if necessary, you should go to more detailed analysis, because things can be done about it. Brain health should be maintained, just like your cardiovascular health is maintained, of course. Why aren't we doing this? Mystery solved. How can we manipulate brain chemistry without inducing unwanted neurological changes that come from our artificial chemical distortions? Why are we so bound up in trying to correct the chemistry of the brain by adding chemicals when we can manipulate its production of chemicals intrinsically? I mean, we know we can upregulate acetylcholine. We know we can upregulate BDNF, trophic factors that contribute to its health and healthy status. We know that we can upregulate dopamine. We know we can upregulate serotonin. We know we can upregulate the production of noradrenaline, norepinephrine. All of these chemicals are the subject of major medical treatments, but they're all unnatural. Why are we using the brain basically to upregulate them? Guess what? When you do that, the brain doesn't make a negative adjustment around their production. which it does every time you give noradrenaline, the brain makes less of it. You have to continue to give more and more and more because the brain's making less and less and less for all of its other processes. This is a bad strategy. When you can use the brain to make chemical adjustments, that should be the agency by which you do that. Mystery solved. Why is there no non-drug strategy that effectively increases sleep duration and quality that's been demonstrated to do that in an RCT? There is. We just completed an RCT. Train the brain. Recover the machinery or strengthen the machinery that actually controls sleep onset and the maintenance of sleep and the brightness when you wake up. And when you do that, every dimension of sleep from a limited period of training for a long period thereafter is improved. Every period, duration, quality, how long it takes, how long you stay asleep before you wake up. All of these things that relate to sleep behavior and its quality are improved by training. Mystery solved. Can you rescue someone from near the edge of the Alzheimer's dementia cliff? Well, we can do that now in most individuals because brain training has a major restorative effect. An even stronger effect comes from a more holistic approach. And actually, I'm not going to talk about it very much, but we are really excited about more holistic strategies in which we're applying brain training in combination, for example, with the Edison strategy, in which they're making complex chemical adjustments to the more broadly expressed chemical distortions or abnormalities that occur in people that have even diagnosed Alzheimer's disease. Edison treatment strategies also apply our program as a rule. I mean, they're strongly recommended that people do it. And in a really exciting trial that's underway, they are doing it with very high reliability with this protocol. And we are seeing, he is seeing, we think, unprecedented positive results in people that have actually fallen over the cliff. So maybe there's, for many people in this situation, there's actually real help that's going to be widely available in the near term. Mystery solved, how can we improve all of those other things that you spend so much time trying to be better at? And I'll talk about that in a second. And finally, how can anyone be a superager? This is an intense period of study that we're engaged in. I just want to say that hold on for really interesting research outcomes that are for studies that are underway. And finally, a final mystery still unsolved. Why hasn't neurologically oriented medicine caught this wave? Why haven't they? What the hell is wrong? If any one of these findings in any one of these populations had come down into the world from neuropharmacology, from pharmaceutical industry, it would be big news. Why is it collectively not incredibly big and good news for medicine and for humankind? Why is that? I mean, it's been a long time now that a first level understanding of the values of this approach has been out there. What's wrong? Why are we so slow? Why are we so retarded in applying this to the benefit of humankind? So it's, I hope that mystery will be solved before too many more years go by, because in its wake are the destroyed and damaged lives of billions of individuals on the planet Earth. So I just want to make one final point, and that is to say it's really beyond health and wellness. It's really about performance in life and performance on the work, and in work and performance. I mean, we've trained just lots of people in lots of ways. Outside of the medical realm, I'm not going to talk about it. You can make a policeman shoot straighter and shoot the wrong person or do the wrong thing less often. You can improve your play as an American football quarterback, even when you're 41 or 2 years old. You can train military or police or other people that have high risk, challenging, fast decision jobs to do a much better job of it. You can train elite athletes And even though they're highly skilled, high performers, you can actually improve their performance. You can actually train someone like Harry Kane from the Tottenham Hotspurs, who after training, credited training in part with his winning the most valuable player in the last World Cup. You can train people in the workplace. For example, power line workers trained for 20 hours, had 1/7 as many serious accidents over the following 4 years on the job. You can train people on the work floor of a developmental group of Fujitsu, and they're actually more productive and more effective in their work over the subsequent year. Of course, everybody can improve by training, because plasticity is everybody's great gift to take advantage of, not just for issues of health, but for quality of life and for performance in life. So we're entering a new brain health management era. It's going to be all about checking, and then if necessary, strengthening and then rechecking your brain. It doesn't really matter what went wrong with your brain. It's to detect that something is wrong routinely and to do something about it when it is, all across the span of your life. And for the first time, actually assure that you, everyone else, is actually reacquiring and then sustaining an organically healthier and functionally more capable brain. It's going to be all about brain health management. It's going to be all about bringing this into everyday medicine and bringing the maintenance and recovery of health into medicine as a routine aspect of the way we manage the health of every individual ultimately on the planet Earth. So that's all I have to say. And if you want to ask me a question after this webinar, just drop me a note at positscience.com. And for references, at brainhq.com, you can select a tag called the science at the bottom of the home page, and you'll see lots of references there. 150, 160 references are there. All relate to RCTs for Posit, and they're also sorted. And if you just play around with the different tabs there, you can see them sorted by clinical indication, or by population, or by the nature of the study. Also, if you contact Dr. Mona Atara, we've collected a computerized file for wide usage, in which we're trying to collect research from all people that are contributing in a number of companies. Many university studies are contributing important studies that relate to brain plasticity-driven improvements of health or quality of life. Go there, ask Dr. Atara, and she'll connect you to that reference base. I mean, the more you know about this across the wider sweep of this science, the better. And this is another place to get good help. In addition to my book, Software, I'm completing a book that, I have completed a book. It's in press. The book is called Brain Dead, will be called Brain Dead. It'll appear soon. You can see it on Amazon. And it really relates to the argument that we're entering an era in which brain health can be and should be managed in every individual by the medical establishment. And if they won't do it, you should take on the job of managing your brain health all by yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation, Doctor. Thank you so much for that. And it's really groundbreaking work. I was actually wondering if you would have any opinion of this, but if it's so hard to get such brain training and such into the medical field, do you think another segue into integrating it into, the wider society could be through schools, through curriculum with children?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, I do. And actually, we've created I created another company, which is co-founded, which is called Stronger Brains, with collaboration with individuals in Australia and Great Britain and other people in the United States. And basically, our target there are children in schools. We created a brain education program in which, after training the child about their brain and its nature and its plasticity, we carry the child in class to a brain lab where they train their brain. And we also tried to, one of the important aspects of this training, our target children are children between about 10 and 14 years of age at this point. One of our goals is to help every child understand that they have a brain that is plastic and that its change and advance is under their control, that every individual has a big upside in life, in their performance abilities and in their life and in the quality of their life, and it's substantially under their control. And that basically by engaging their brain in appropriate ways in real life, you know, obviously not mostly on a computer and mostly in real life, you can advance your brain in ways that empowers it, enriches it, increases your possibilities in life. But we're also across the same period trying to define weaknesses in these children. And with the definition of weakness, we're trying to increase the resilience of the child. We're trying to help the child on the emotional side of their life. I might say we're intensively engaging the child, not just in brain training on a computer in the sort of classical sense, but also in meditation related and other more holistic strategies to try to help the child do a better job of establishing attentional control and personal control and all of the values that can come from controlling your emotions in a positive way. And we're seeing wonderful outcomes in this approach. And my notion is that if we could just train every child about the brain, why is it that we don't have a class routinely about the brain in every school? Why don't we explain to every child the values of basically using your brain in a deeper and more useful way in life, and across the span of your life? You know, it's just, I do think that might be the avenue for basically bringing this ultimately into the world in every life.
Absolutely, wonderfully put. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be with you guys. I look forward to the next talks.
Hello, Dr. Michael. Good evening from London and good evening to everybody present. That was really fascinating. Thank you. I really enjoyed listening to you. I kind of want to have a cup of coffee and ask you tons of questions, but I don't think that's going to happen just yet. But a question I'd like to ask you, please, Dr. Michael, is you mentioned training, and we know that training helps with neuroplasticity. And you mentioned cognitive reserve. So is it the training that one does that builds up those reserves? And is there a particular brain training that you found to be the most effective, particularly in the older brain? Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood your question exactly. Training to help what?
So you know how you said in the older brain, when training was performed by the older brain, there was significant growth.
Right.
Is there a particular exercise, is there a particular training that you found to be effective?
Yeah.
And does that help the cognitive reserve that you mentioned?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. No,
It's okay.
Well, first of all, let me just say that if everyone led an appropriately brain-informed life, they would never have to go to do something as silly as go to a computer and train their brain.
Mm-hmm.
But we just led life in a mindful way. We led life say throughout life, from the beginning of life to the end of life, more like a child, engaging in a life of continuous learning, in which we're driving continuous positive change in the brain. Our brains would be more continuously healthy. So that's the first point. So really, brain training is what you do when you haven't been taking very good care of your brain, or you want to drive yourself to a special or high level in some performance ability area, or when you're in trouble, when a vicissitude befalls you and something that you have a challenge because of something befalling you. But yes, brain training on a computer, brainHQ, those exercises are designed to very rapidly change the brain in a healthward direction. So if you go on to those training exercises, you will be driven to improve your performance, first in very elemental ways that relate to well your brain is resolving information in fast time and in fine detail, how accurate it is in its operations, how attentive it is, how controlled it is in its operations. And then you'll elaborate that, you could say, to higher level operations of the brain. And when you get through those extension of changes, you have changed your brain physically, you've changed its health, you've changed it from the point of view of its organic health. So brainHQ basically was designed to accomplish that. It was designed to illuminate your brain on the basis of these extensive studies initially in animal models.
Thank you. I've downloaded the app, so I will start the exercises soon. Thank you.
Is neurofeedback is more on computer, or it is more on like the self-training, organic training? Neurofeedback.
I can't really hear the question. My hearing is not very good, and I just didn't hear the question. Can you, Faiza, could you relay the question to me?
Yeah, can you again repeat the question?
Okay.
Pardon?
Okay. So basically, is the natural, is neurofeedback a natural training or a computerized training?
Oh, you mean it's a computerized training, and you are comparing with what was the other thing?
Or natural way training?
Okay, no, Dr. Merzenich, what she's trying to ask is whether it is a natural way training or a computerized training.
For neurofeedback.
Whether it was, I still didn't hear what you said, Faiza, whether it was natural.
Yeah, whether it's a natural training or a computerized training.
Oh, I'm sorry. What I'm saying, Jose, is that naturalized training is great, and if you understand what the brain is asking you to do, and this is a really important thing because most people do not understand, do not have a clear understanding of how engagement of the brain might be effective for you, or what would constitute a sort of complete personal program by which you would drive the brain in an appropriate improving direction. And basically in computerized training, it's easy to control the progression of change on a computer. So basically how this evolved was that understanding the neurological processes that drove the brain in a more powerful or empowering direction, understanding the rules that govern that change, we could implement those rules and be highly efficient in driving the brain to a very substantial degree in a corrective direction in a very short period of time. So you train the brain for 10 hours and you can drive large-scale physical and connectional changes in a brain. If I train a brain for 10 hours, I can improve the learning rate and the attention control in that brain in a way that's enduring for many, many months, if not years to come. If I train a brain for 10 hours and I'm 70 years old and I wait till the 80th birthday, I'm still faster and sharper at what I'm doing than I was before I began training 10 years before. So the advantage of computerized training is it can be very highly efficient. And you can train the brain, you can drive the brain in a recovering direction in an accelerated way. But if you just knew what you were doing in everyday life, my book, Softwired, actually tries to focus on that. How should I be living my life so that I'm doing what my brain is asking me to do to sustain its health? And I strongly encourage you to think about this science from the point of view of how to manage your own life to the advantage of your brain. You'll hear more in the next two talks about other things that you can do in a more holistic perspective about life, about what you can do that will advantage the health of your brain. Again, thank you to the people that have put up with this in the audience. I am a nerd. And I do talk about these things in a complicated way, so I appreciate your attention, and I hope you understand and appreciate some of what we're trying to do.
Our next speaker is Mr. Adi Narayanan Venkatachalam from Anadi Foundation, India. Mr. Venkatachalam is the founder of Anadi Foundation. He is a TEDx speaker and adjunct professor of practice at Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, a premium institute in India. He has an MS in computer engineering from North Carolina State University, USA. With the yogic background and having spent more than 150 days in meditative silence as a phenomenological research in contemplative practices, Mr. Adi Narayanan blends modern neuroscience, epigenetics, yogic practices, and contemplation in his lectures. He has taught courses on yogic neuroscience and inner development at IIT Delhi. I welcome Mr. Adi Narayanan to give a talk on how yoga and contemplative practices can enhance neuroplasticity.
Namaste from India. It's a great pleasure to talk to you all. And thank you, Professor Michael. It was a wonderful presentation. It was very enlightening. I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a yogi, though I have a modern sciences background. As Faizi mentioned, I've spent more than 150 days in what is called Mauna Tapasya. Tapasya is defined as where you completely redirect your mind along the direction that you wish to, which is considered one of the toughest skills to possess. So it can be looked at as intensive meditation in isolation. So I have been in isolation for periods of up to 40 days at a stretch, with no communication with outside world. As a first person research into this human experience. So my talk here would be to do with how yoga and contemplative practices sit in the context of neuroplasticity. Okay. Now, after Professor Michael's talk, neuroplasticity is clear, and how to proceed with it with respect to training, brain training. That definitely sets the context for this talk, because in yoga, we look at brain training. But how, we will be looking at it shortly. Okay. Now, so to set a personalized context, all of us can definitely relate with some of the common challenges that individuals world over face now. For example, in these times of the lockdown, there is huge fear, uncertainty, anxiety over the future, stress. Attention is definitely an issue with children as well. Relationships and the kinds of choices that are available to us, which make decision making quite challenging. So all of these challenges, we can look at it as from a personalized context, they impede our growth and somehow make us feel constrained. None of us like to feel constrained. All of us like to feel expansive. It's a feel. When we talk of these challenges, we are obviously talking of how it feels. The feel is where we look at it in terms of first person. First person means it's insider's perspective. Now in neuroscience, we take a third person's view through an fMRI or EEG. Now that is capturing signals. But these are common challenges which anybody can relate with, because you can feel it. Now, most of these are right now in modern approaches, they are treated with drugs or pharmacological interventions. So that's where, as Professor Michael pointed to beautifully, are there non-drug strategies to approach this? So brain training is definitely amongst those. That's where yoga and contemplative practices from the Eastern traditions have traditionally been used as non-drug strategies to train the brain, to train the nervous system, to train the whole human system. It's a holistic way of looking at it. So my effort during the Mauna Tapasya, Mauna means silent, Tapasya means intensive effort. So silent, intensive effort towards meditation, where awareness is the key component, so that one is able to self-navigate with or without assistance from externalized inputs. So that becomes a very important strategy to look at, approach to look at. So this points to the ability to adapt to new circumstances. For example, most of us would not have expected this lockdown. And almost, many of us did not have sufficient time to adapt to these. So what could be the challenges that arise out of such circumstances? For example, you're just logged in, depending on your location, obviously, which part of the world you are in. But lockdown has, varying significances to personal life, workplace. So this pandemic has caused such adaptation, mandatory. There is no other option. But even otherwise, the way the world was proceeding, if we look at, there's a study that shows that the world is accelerating in terms of, for example, the information exposure that every human being has to handle. There is an information explosion in terms of complexity and the sheer data size. So how do you adapt to it? How do you crunch it? So this is the time of big data, whether we like it or not, right? And this is the time of multidimensionality. Multitasking is in. It is no longer sequential tasking. So it's no longer taking just one thing at a time and taking a few years to finish it. And depending on the cultural context, in the preceding generations, it was possible to just stick on to one job, one professional career all through one's life. But now for the new generations, even that is shifting. So career switches are very common. So this is the context of the world right now. And hence, it has become more than ever, it has become very, very important to adapt to new circumstances, and very quickly. So we call this the VUCA. The VUCA reality is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So volatility, you can imagine it's so many parameters are shifting. So it is like standing on shifting ground. Your ground is not stable any longer. It's shifting ground. How do you handle that? That is very critical. Uncertainty is, is there predictability to your life? What kinds of circumstances play a role in determining your life? So there's huge uncertainty with even with respect to personal life expectations and workplace expectations. Complexity. We all would like a life of leisure, just chilling out. But now we see there is necessary complexity in life, which whether we like it or not, we need to, handle it. And then ambiguity. There is no one-on-one mapping, a cause and effect mapping, a causal relationship or a correlation with what you think, what you do, and what happens to you. So with all these, it becomes, one has to adapt to these circumstances. So that's where even simple studies, what we call the default mode network. So here, if you see mind wandering, so when faced with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, for most of us, the default mode of operation is, giving into stress, giving into all of these common challenges that we face, and this also in terms of mind wandering. One jumps from one thought to another thought, and it keeps going on, almost as if it's not under our control. So should that be our plight? Should we just take it at that and that's it? Do nothing about it. So that's where, understanding the backdrop to it, understanding why we need to approach it, not just as a passive, receiver, but what can we do to actively take forward our lives, handle our lives better, so that we make our lives meaningful to ourselves and the world around us. That becomes very critical. In fact, very interestingly, there are different kinds of poverties that are defined. So one is poverty of food. The world at large, there are so many billions of people that do not have one square meal a day. So that is one kind of poverty. Another kind of poverty is the poverty of love, affection, emotional bonding. That is also, stretched in the, the current reality. So poverty of love and care and affection, that becomes very critical to invest in. But a third very important poverty that the world is facing now is poverty of inspiration or motivation. To be inspired, to be motivated is a big challenge now. So when we wake up, for many of us, especially youth, when we wake up in the morning, a sense of motivation to look forward to, what do I do? Why should I do this? That sense of purpose and meaning is a big challenge. So that's where understanding the, we will try to address this from multiple angles. So here, a default mode network is looked at as a, you have neuronal pathways which determine your regular, habitual responses. So the default mode network defines how you look at yourself. No, it's like the neurological basis of yourself. And it also looks at how do you feel on a normal basis. So it's like in computer science, we talk of idle cycles. When the processor is not doing anything, it's idling. When a machine, when a car is not doing anything specific, it's idling. There are idle cycles. The engine is idling. So likewise, our brain idles. But even there are differences from one person's default mode network to another person's default mode network. So the way we think about our own past, future, self-reference, thoughts, and sometimes we get into this negative thought cycles, which are sticky. So we wish to be positive, but we get into this mood of negativity. And when we discuss with people, we could get into negative modes because of the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that we face in our lives, constantly shifting grounds. And hence that could, make the negative cycles very sticky. And that could be our default state, that we are in. And these are actually related to mental disorders like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. So that's where Professor Richard Davidson of the University of Wisconsin and Madison, he, along with, he works closely with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. So with over more than 3 decades of research, they have looked at, his research group has looked at the relationship between contemplative practices and neuroscience, the neurological basis for what one experiences in contemplative practices and meditation. So that this background leads us to the need for neuroplasticity, because how else do you adapt to all these challenges that face us? The more the challenges, the more that we need to adapt, and it's almost real time. Some of us, struggle with it, but some of us are able to adapt to it better. And what causes these differentiations? So that's where there is a need to look at neuroplasticity, as giving us clear clarity with respect to what goes on inside this. If I can just isolate it in the brain, and for the time being, and not look at the other aspects of the nervous system, both the central and the peripheral nervous system. So leaving out the spinal cord, the other parts of the nervous system, just the brain, if we look at, this question becomes very, very critical. How do we adapt? Because this seems like a black box. So what's going on within this that everyone would like to know? So that is very, very, critical to ask. So that's where neural plasticity. We look at plasticity in terms of when we say something is plastic, that means it's changeable. It can be changed. It can change with experience. It can change functionally. It can change structurally. So all kinds of experience or even injury can drive this plasticity. So that's where this gives us hope, because then, what we understand is that, okay, it's not like set in stone, right? Otherwise, for many of us, it could seem like, no, the brain is just set. There's no way we can change it. So children, as they grow up, the brain is plastic, but after a certain age, that's it. There's no hope. But neuroplasticity actually gives us that hope, because otherwise, how do we account for adaptation to such complexity growing in our daily lives? Complexity in the world, technological complexity, societal complexity, political complexity, even medical complexity. How do we account for adaptation to that? You know, that's where neuroplasticity gives us hope. Because yes, there is functional and structural plasticity, at least evidence of it. A lot more work needs to be done, but the evidence of plastic mechanisms is such a huge relief. And that means experience can drive it. Modulated experience can drive functional and structural plasticity. That is something that is a huge area that becomes open. So attention, emotional regulation, conscious response, awareness, these become keywords. Because with directed attention, you can be sure of a response. And a response which is not vague, which is not unfounded in scientific theory. You have the plastic mechanisms that can be explored, which provide the theory for people to even pay attention, to work towards attention. Because let's say the ideal attention span is defined as 15 minutes. That need not be set in stone. With yogic practice, what we try to do is work on these challenges so that you can guide your attention, you can guide your span, the length of time that you spend on any specific focus area. You can determine it. Likewise, emotional regulation. We can determine how to respond to external stimuli. It need not be automatic. It need not be reactive. It can be a conscious response, right? And well regulated as we see fit. So it can be open to reason, and not just as a philosophy, but as brain sciences. So there is a strong scientific evidence that grows this theory of better control, regulation of human response, right? Not externally regulated, but that which can be internally regulated. So the second aspect is enhanced brain synchrony and coherence. So when we look at mind wandering, it hints at incoherence. So different kinds of ideas coming from different, just going in varied ways with apparently no pattern. So random thoughts, random emotions, random internal conditions, mood swings, they need not be so random after all. So that's where, how do we, integrate all these different cognitive functions, abilities to have a coherent experience. So that's where we look at yoga. So the various challenges that face us, we see plasticity gives us hope that these challenges, plasticity gives us the background theory to understanding that yes, we adapt to circumstances, and that adaptation can be modulated by personal direction, or internal direction. And we need not be, puppets at the hands of random experience or random occurrences in our, circumstantial world, circumstantial reality. So that's where yoga is a very ancient system of achieving these aspects, the classical definition of yoga to introduce, since this is a diverse audience, I feel it necessary to introduce the simple definitions of what yoga is, because now yoga is a worldwide phenomenon, but many of us look at it in terms of just a physical practice, a physical routine. But the classical definition, as per the Indian texts where these are defined. So one of the defining texts is called Yoga Sutra, or Aphorisms of Yoga by Maharishi Patanjali. So there yoga is defined as Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, or yoga is the process of conscious regulation and overcoming of mental conditioned responses. So you have mental conditioned responses which can be consciously regulated. And how to do that is the process of yoga. So a couple of more definitions occur in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is again a philosophical text which talks of yoga and which talks of deep philosophy. So there, one of the definitions of yoga is excellence in action in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. So note the point, this is to emphasize how yoga has been looked at. So now the modern way in which most people approach yoga is not along these lines. But here, yoga is looked at in terms which clearly align with plasticity, the brain plasticity, the neuronal plasticity. That means you can consciously regulate and overcome mental condition patterns. It's not set in stone. Remember, that's how we started with. And excellence in action. That means it can be of very great practical significance. It need not be just like automatic, where you are not in control. So it clearly points to you being in control. And similarly, another definition of yoga is equanimity of the mind is called yoga. So emotional balance, where no matter what the outer circumstances are, how do you maintain your emotional state of balance, your mood regulation. So this gives us hope with respect to mental states like depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, and so on. So in all of these conditions, equanimity of mind, if it can be maintained, that leads to a huge jump in self-regulation. So it is similar to, if we look at it, it can be equated with something like, you have an air conditioning system. So the air conditioning system, no matter, outside temperature could be, let's say 40 degrees Celsius. Actually, here in India, where I'm in South India. Here, the outside temperature during the daytime has touched 40 degrees Celsius. Okay, so it's hot. The outside temperature could vary hugely, but with air conditioning, what do? We condition the inner, physical environment in such a way that the temperature is maintained. Likewise, is there a way by which we can fit an air conditioning system to the mind, right? That's a very poignant question. So we have been able to design an air conditioning system for the physical environment. Now, can we design a system to air condition to our internal states, our inner states, our mind? So that is a very, very important question to deal with. If at all it's possible, that gives us tremendous hope, and hence it's worthwhile pursuing, right? So that's where the definitions of yoga definitely point in that direction, where it's clear that you can handle your mind, you can handle your actions, you can train your outer equipment as well, instrument as well, and you can still your mind, you can direct it the way you see fit. So these all, we are looking at it in terms of the body, the emotion, and cognition. all three conditions we are looking at. So this is this gets very interesting, right? So that's where when we deal with contemplation and meditation, again, in the classical texts in India, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, one of the ways yoga is looked at that is popular now is in terms of the Ashtanga Yoga, or the 8 aspects of yoga, where you even have aspects like values. For example, personal and social values that lead to harmony. So harmonious coexistence, peaceful coexistence of all human beings. Is that even possible? A world without war? So that's where one of the values, for example, is ahimsa. Ahimsa means non-violence. That is amazing. We had, a great Indian leader, Mahatma Gandhi, displayed ahimsa, lived non-violence. So that shows that, yes, these are possible. And he was guided by this yogic text of Bhagavad Gita. So we see that even value orientation, as a society, can we be peaceful? Not just as an individual, but as a society. Can we have excellent value systems of mutual love and respect? Can there be a world without poverty? Can there be a world without racial discrimination? All these are very important questions which yoga addresses. So excellent personal and social values that create harmony. Then comes asana, pranayama, which are to do with your postures. So your physical posture, how do you train your body to be strong, light, resilient? And pranayama are breathing patterns which link up to the mind. So generally in the yogic texts, the prana or the breath is considered the link between the body and the mind. We will very soon look at a demonstration that will give you an understanding, And pratyahara, prati-ahara means generally our mind is oriented outward. So mind wandering is also to do with outward orientation of the mind, where it jumps, there are various stimuli and responses to those stimuli, which are considered automatic almost. So that's where pratyahara, ahara means food for the mind. So pratyahara is the process by which the food for the mind is no longer coming from external sensory stimuli. That is amazing. It is captured in a very ancient text, arguably written in at around 1st or 2nd century BC. So at least 2000 years old. And they are talking of all of these. Dharana is focus, attention with effort. Dhyana is with practice, you focus effortlessly. And samadhi is a very interesting condition where we experience ourselves constantly as this is me and all this is not me. That means this is the subject and that is the object. So the subject-object dual experience, we are bound in this condition. With samadhi, it's clearly said this need not be so. So what is it that leads to retraining the brain, retraining the neural pathways to uncondition it so that even the sense of boundary becomes fluid? Wow, that is amazing stuff, right? So that's where let's try a very simple practice where let me illustrate this with a very, very simple practice, okay? So please sit comfortably, comfortably wherever you are. And if it's possible, please have your eyes closed. Anyhow, the verbal instructions would be there. So closing eyes helps in internalizing awareness. because a significant part of our brain, processes video or visual impulses. Relax yourselves. And I'm going to ask you to count the number of breaths that you take. Your breathing, your in-breath and out-breath is one count. So when I say start, you could count your number of breaths in and out together is one count. And after a minute, when I say stop, you could mentally record your number of breaths. Okay, so for a minute you're going to observe your breath and count the number of breaths that you take in a minute. You don't need to control the process, you don't need to do anything, just relax. It's a very simple process. Okay, so let us start now. You could start counting. Okay, stop. If some of you could share your count, that would be helpful. You could share it in the chat window. What does this mean? Don't worry about it. Okay. So thank you for sharing. Now let us go to the second step of the practice. Okay. Now let us, your arm, if you stretch it in front of you, imagine a candle at arm's length. And I'm going to ask you to blow the candle out. Okay. So you breathe in and direct your breath through your mouth. With an open mouth, you direct it towards the candle, imaginary candle at arm's length. Okay. Please do this 5 times. Can you do this 5 times? Where you breathe in, blow the candle out. Breathe in. After 5 times, relax. Again, let's try the experiment again. So please close your eyes. Now what you're going to do is, you're going to breathe in deeply. And as you breathe out, you're going to breathe out with a slight hissing sound. With your mouth closed, when you contract your throat muscles, that provides resistance to the flow of air. So this is called Ujjayi. So it provides a slight resistance to the outflow of air. So that when we do, it deepens the breath. So let's try the experiment with this in mind. So we breathe in deeply, and when we breathe out, a slight hissing sound with the mouth closed. The breathing is only through the nose. A very simple, relaxing condition. The condition is extremely relaxing. But here you are going to regulate the breath, okay? And also keep a count of the breath, right? So when I say start, you start regulating your breath and keeping count simultaneously, so that your breathing in is deep and breathing out is slow, gradual, and deeply relaxing, okay? So start now. Okay, stop. And can I have some counts in the chat? Okay, thank you. So some of you would have observed, a very interesting thing here. For some of us, the 1 minute we might not have, the 1 minute might not have really felt like a minute. You'd have heard start and then you'd have heard stop. In the first experiment, the feeling of time would have been different from the second step. In the second step, your feeling of time could have dilated for some of you, would have shrunk for some of you. It's very, very interesting. So even our perception of objective time, now a minute is a minute, but our perception of it is governed by so many underlying parameters. This is very useful to take note of. And similarly, if you have realized, you would have become much calmer. It did not take a long time, just 1 minute, but you would have become like extremely calm, relaxed. So that's where this methodology is called first person methodology, where you can conduct an experiment and actually record the change. So you feel it. Now this is the insider's perspective. That's where a future direction for all research is to actually be able to correlate the field with the brain sciences. How does the brain change? Because how do you otherwise get the feel? So that's where we need to definitely look at aspects like neuroplasticity, default mode network, which regions of the brain are firing, which neural pathways are getting activated, and even epigenetic changes. What are the epigenetic changes that happen? So that's where in the yogic system, there is a science of Swara Yoga. Swara is basically the hemispheric firing, the left and right brain hemispheres. Now through neuroscience, we understand that the hemispheres don't specialize in very unique functions. There are, a crossover functionalities as well, because that is the whole idea of plasticity, right? But still, the way the hemispheres fire are related to the breath cycles, the flow of the left and the right nostrils. That keeps shifting. And very amazingly, all of this has been captured thousands of years back. And similarly, first person methodology in yoga and contemplative practices also involve visualization practices, by which you can visualize yourselves to be a much more positive person. You can visualize yourself to be less negative, as throwing out negativity, absorbing positivity, and it makes a difference. You can visualize clearly, internal images. You can build up auto-suggestion. Now, all of this is generally a first-person methodology that is attempted in the yogic sciences. But how does it correlate with data? That's where, for example, a typical yogic experience is in terms of an expansive sense of self, where your sense of self becomes boundaryless or your boundaries become fluid. Professor Richardson talks of altered traits. So over a period of time, long-term meditators are bound to be more compassionate. How does that happen? So kindness, compassion, how does it get integrated? Now, do we understand how the brain changes to accommodate, such trait changes, such character changes? So that is very interesting line of research. And one starts having an interconnected worldview. So where it's not so compartmentalized and rigid. Actually, we start seeing the interconnectedness behind everything. So that's why at Anadi Foundation, we offer yoga, meditation, and silence-based, programs, so that everyone can get benefited. And this has been happening, and a lot of changes have been observed, and that's where studies done, modern studies done on, for example, Sahaja. There is a meditation called Sahaja Yoga meditation. So long-term meditators clearly showed enhanced theta, synchronicity. So the brain coherence, the state of brain coherence shifts. So EEG, through EEG, these can be mapped. So you have alpha, beta, theta, delta waves. And each state, each mood shift, what does it correspond to? These studies become so very important to capture, the first person experience that you feel. So there is clear evidence that, theta and alpha wave, synchronicity points to, positive emotional states, positive states of emotion. And this internalized awareness, where our attention is not just jumping here and there. That means the mind wandering is definitely lowered. So that is what it points to. And in terms of connectivity, as we saw, what is meant by a integrated worldview? That means there is enhanced brain connectivity. So one is coherence, another is connectivity. How are the various regions of the brain communicating with each other to form our worldview? So that is very useful to study and bring forth. So there is clear evidence that even short-term meditation induces, white matter changes. So that points to, functional and structural changes, which you can definitely feel, just as this simple experiment would have shown you. So that's where, on a concluding note, when I experimented with myself, in the yogic tradition, we'll use this body and mind as a laboratory, as a lab. Now the lab setup need not be just external. It can also be this body and mind, where you can define experiments, you can design experiments, and actually conduct, and observe and infer. All of the scientific methodologies that we use in the outer world can be used in the inner reality as well. So that is a very huge possibility available to us, where yoga, contemplative sciences, meditative sciences can work with neurosciences, epigenetics, to make this world a much better place to live in. I have even seen, for example, there is a complex text called Mahabharata, which has about 2 million words. When I tried to memorize it, it took me about 3 years. There are more than 200 characters in it, and it's exceptionally complex. Comparatively, for example, Iliad and Odyssey are about 1/4 the level of complexity of what is there in Mahabharata. So I'm sure, structural changes would have been there in my brain, just that I've not, done any recording of that. Maybe hippocampus grew in size. That could happen. So that's where there is a huge possibility forward, because the world has so many challenges. There are mental disorders, neurological disorders that need to be addressed in non-pharmacological ways, or at least assisting pharmacological intervention. So this is a huge and exciting area forward that we can work towards. So thank you, and I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adinaran, for the presentation. And now we are open for the questions. I think we don't have any questions. That presentation was quite very clear, so we don't have any questions. And now we'll move forward with the next presentation. Thank you. Our last speaker is Ms. Tammy Ann Cadwell from Above and Beyond Education, Australia. Ms. Tammy Ann is also known as the Mind Brain Lady. She is a teacher and has completed over 8 years of self-directed professional development in this field, and presents internationally on her unique holistic approach to educational neuroscience. Ms. Tammy Ann is qualified educational neuroscience specialist teacher and accredited social emotional learning trainer with 8 years of classroom teaching experience. She now teaches the brain science and psychology behind well-being, teaching and learning combined for teachers, parents, and students. Tammy Ann is so passionate about making this knowledge accessible to all by giving everyday people the knowledge, tools, and techniques to realize and reach their incredible true potential. Her strength lies in her ability to convey the complex topics of neuroscience and the practical ways we all can use this knowledge in our everyday lives in a simple, entertaining manner for people who have never even heard of neuroplasticity. With her trademark enthusiasm, I now welcome Ms. Tammy Ann Cadwell to give a talk on happy, healthy, and holistic approach of neuroplasticity.
Very much. Okay. So hello everyone from Australia. I'm going to be talking about how we can harness and take full advantage of the immense power and potential of neuroplasticity in our brains. Okay, let's get started. So my name is Tammy Ann Caldwell, aka the Mind Brain Lady. I am not a neurologist or a neuroscientist. I am not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a professor, but I am a teacher of more than 8 years for both kindergarten and all the way through to year 12. I have 8 years of self-directed professional learning, qualifications, research and practice into the field of brain science and its practical applications to education and indeed to our everyday lives all the time. I'm an educational neuroscience specialist. I'm an accredited social and emotional learning trainer for an educational psychology professor. I founded and run my own business above and beyond education. I teach the brain science behind wellbeing and its direct impact on teaching and learning to teachers, parents and students from 6 years of age to 18 and beyond. And I've presented on my unique evidence-based holistic approach to educational neuroscience right across Australia and New Zealand. And importantly, I practice what I preach. So all the things I'll be sharing with you today, I know work because I've used them and experienced the benefits they have over the last 8 years. Now, my goal today is to share with you how it is actually often simpler and a lot more fun than you may think to improve your cognitive brain performance and brain health by taking a happy, healthy and holistic evidence-based approach to your life. Now, a little bit about how I got here. I actually shouldn't be here today. One, because right now it's 3 a.m. in Australia, but also because according to the statistics, I should have failed school. I should have no non-school qualifications at all. I should have poor health, be unemployed, and be disadvantaged for life. But none of these things could be further from the truth. The reason that I was supposed to have these outcomes in life goes something like this. From the age of 3, I was raised by my wonderful single mother, who herself didn't complete any schooling beyond year 10. For most of my childhood, we lived officially below the poverty line in Australia. I went to 5 different rural public schools throughout my schooling years. I lived under 2 different aliases or false names for safety reasons. And throughout my childhood, we were going through the family court process. So because of that, these were meant to be my outcomes, but they weren't. And they weren't because our past and our present circumstances do not need to determine our future. What actually happened was at my high school that you can see on the screen, in 2005, I finished year 12, finished school, and I received the DUX award, the top academic award out of more than 1,500 students. Now, I always knew I wanted to make a positive difference in my life, and at just the age of 19, I became a travelling educator. I got my first teaching job for the Western Australian Parliament. By 23, I had 2 university degrees, the first person in my family to do so, and I had a distinction average grade. I then became a teacher, which I've now been for the last 8 years. I semi-retired from full-time work when I was just 28 years of age, and I founded and now run with my partner my own business, Above and Beyond Education. Now, when I first started making the link between brain science and education, I was 23 years of age, and I was extremely excited to see the immense benefits that came from combining these 2 fields, brain science with teaching and learning. I remember one young student in the first few months of me teaching the students as I learnt, because as I learnt neuroscience and how it could link to education, I taught the students in my primary class. So together we learnt how our brain learns best and added that to the puzzle of how we could make education work best for all of us. And I remember one 7-year-old little primary student saying to the principal when he came into our classroom one day, "Oh, we couldn't concentrate because we were running out of neurotransmitters. So we just did some dancing and we released 56 different neurotransmitters in 30 seconds of standing up and moving. So now we're back to work." Students in my class all of a sudden didn't worry about making mistakes because challenges were celebrated as an exciting way to make their neurons, their brain cells, pop out new branches and increase connections in their brain. And instead of being bored by repetitive work like spelling words or times tables, they became excited knowing that every time they repeated or practiced something, they were increasing the strength and power of the electrical signals going through their neural pathways. I now empower people, teachers, students, parents, and others who have never even heard of the word neuroplasticity with the knowledge, tools, and techniques to take control of their own lives, their own thoughts, their own emotion, their own brain and mind, to realise and reach their incredible true potential. I've presented across Australia and New Zealand to students, teachers, parents, policymakers, politicians, business people, at Parliament houses, expos, think tanks, national conferences, forums. And what I've realized is that all of us are quite literally brain changers every single day. That's how neuroplasticity works. It's a fact. If the brain is involved in all learning that we do, which it is, and if we're learning throughout our whole lives, which we are, and learning doesn't have to be in a classroom or a university or a school, we learn every single day, whether it's in our homes, our recreational pursuits, our jobs, our relationships, we're learning all the time. So doesn't it make sense that we know how the brain learns best? Yet what I very quickly realized was that most of us have absolutely no idea how the brain works, learns and grows. So it is one of my goals in life to change this fact. See, the brain's the foundation for all learning or education that happens. No matter who you are, where you are, what you're learning or how you're learning it, your brain is involved. It's the foundation for all learning. So it makes sense that we understand how the brain works, learns and grows best. In terms of educational neuroscience specifically, it's simply using what neuroscientists understand about the human mind and brain to teach students as best we can and to help students learn as best they can. It combines these three fields: education, so teaching and learning in the classroom, with psychology, and that's regarding our thoughts, our mind, and neuroscience, the physical brain science of what's actually going on physically in our head. The problem is educators, psychologists and neuroscientists often don't speak the same language, and communication between experts in these three fields is an issue, and it hinders the joining together of these three fields. But that is a problem that I have figured out how to overcome. I don't come from a neuroscience or psychology background. I come first and foremost from an education background, and I found a way to translate psychology and neuroscience into practical applications for teachers, parents, students, and other people. And I know that what I'm doing works because of the incredible feedback and experiences I've had over the last 8 years teaching students in classrooms around Australia and also in workshops around Australia and New Zealand. And when it comes to teaching adults, parents and teachers, we've received overwhelmingly positive feedback from them about how beneficial it is to understand how to translate and apply brain science, cutting-edge brain science, to the education and well-being lives of themselves and their children. But I am by no means the first person to come up with the idea of joining brain science with education. Dr. Judy Willis is a very well-known American neurologist, or she was a neurologist for about 20 years before she became an educator, because she realized how ridiculous it was that as teachers, we don't have any idea generally how the students' brains we are teaching every single day work or learn best. And she realizes the immense benefits that can come when teachers understand how the brains of the students they're teaching learn best. Thankfully, leading educators around the world and leading neuroscientists now appreciate and understand how beneficial it is to combine the fields of neuroscience with teaching and learning in the classroom. One such neuroscientist, Dr. Sandra van Alderen from the Netherlands, gave a TED talk in 2015 in which she talked about, as Judy Willis believes, how ridiculous it is that as teachers we have very little, if any, idea about how our students' brains work or learn best. And at the end of her 20-minute TED talk, she said, and I quote, "However, I realise it is neither simple nor straightforward to apply or transmit brain science to education. If it was, someone would have done it already." And when she said that, I was literally jumping off my couch because I had already done it. I had found a way to apply and transmit brain science to teaching and learning, education at schools in the classroom. And I found a way to do it in a simple and straightforward manner that works for students as young as 6 years of age, all the way up to high school, university, and parents and teachers. What we teach at schools applies to all of you listening now too. First and foremost, we need to realise that we need good levels of well-being, because then and only then can our brain learn and work effectively. And when we combine that with better brain-based teaching and learning practices, it makes learning more enjoyable, easier, and effective, which in turn leads to better well-being, more engagement, better behaviour, and for all of us, less stress, which is of course important. And the evidence is clear. When students, teachers, and parents know how a brain works, learns, and grows, and when we use this knowledge daily, students do better academically at school. And there's an awful lot of research attesting to this fact. And I know from my experience over the last 8 years that this is indeed true. As Dr. John Pelly, a professor of medical education, says, students who understand how their brain works always perform better than those who don't. And it's because as humans, when we know how and why something we're doing benefits us and can help us achieve our goals, we're far more likely to put in the effort to do those things consistently and to do them well. Now, I realise that none of you are students in a classroom, but you do have goals, things you want to achieve in life. And if you understood how and why different things you could do would help you to achieve those goals, you'd be far more likely to put in the effort to do them consistently and do them well. So, what is your ultimate goal for your future? Have a think about it. What is your ultimate goal for your future? Now, in your own language and in your own words, I'm guessing that you said or thought something like this. You want to be happy and healthy in life. You want to feel successful and satisfied. And you want to feel that you're meeting your true potential as a human in this life on earth. And we can achieve these goals by taking a happy, healthy, and holistic approach to our lives every day. So why a holistic approach to neuroplasticity? The word holistic is very rarely, if ever, used in the same sentence as neuroplasticity or indeed science, but it should be. The OECD, an international organisation, has within it the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation. And within the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation, they have a specific focus on linking brain science to education. They call it the birth of a learning science. And I'm now going to read to you a couple of lines from an article that this Centre for Educational Research and Innovation wrote. Many of the environmental factors conducive to improved brain functioning are everyday matters. The quality of social environment and interactions, nutrition, physical exercise, and sleep, which may seem too obvious and so easily overlooked in their impact on education. By conditioning our minds and bodies correctly, it is possible to take advantage of the brain's potential for plasticity and to facilitate the learning process. This calls for holistic approaches which recognise the close interdependence of physical and intellectual well-being and the close interplay of the emotional and cognitive. In the fields of medicine and science, far too often problems are treated in isolation, and it is not recognised often enough that when we take a holistic approach based on evidence, this is necessary to achieve the maximum beneficial results. So what does being happy and healthy have to do with neuroplasticity? Great question. And to answer that, we need to do a little bit more brain science. So in much the same way that I teach all my students, we need to know about the amygdala. The amygdala, or we call it the angry amygdala. The angry amygdala turns on, whirs away, goes into superdrive with electrical impulses firing away when we are tired or stressed, angry, nervous, worried, upset, anxious, or scared. When the amygdala turns on, when we have these bad emotions or negative emotions, it's not a good thing, because the amygdala, when it's on, acts like a padlock and it shuts out the front part of our brain, here behind our forehead, our prefrontal cortex, from working. And this is not good, because our prefrontal cortex is the smart, human, learning, rational, logical part of our brain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for things like higher order thinking, learning, understanding, analysing, emotional regulation, self-control, impulse control, risk assessment and planning, and putting things into perspective. Plus, when our amygdala is on and when we don't have good levels of well-being, we're stressed or anxious and so on, it also starts to impair our hippocampus, our memory part of our brain, which can even start to shrink when we don't have good levels of well-being. And it gets worse. When we don't have good levels of well-being and we're particularly stressed, the stress hormone cortisol is pumped through our body, floods our body. Now, to illustrate how harmful this is on a long-term basis, when someone is about to undergo an organ transplant operation, doctors pump them full of cortisol. Why? Because cortisol shuts down the immune system, thereby allowing the patient, the recipient, to accept that foreign organ they're being given rather than reject it. So you can see that if on a long-term basis we are stressed, anxious, worried and so on, and cortisol is flooding through our body, our immune system is severely limited. Plus, when we don't have good levels of well-being and instead we're stressed and anxious, neurogenesis doesn't occur, the process by which we create new brain cells, or what's called cognitive reserve. So when we don't have good levels of well-being, cortisol, immune system being shut down, neurogenesis doesn't occur, our hippocampus, our memory is impaired, and our prefrontal cortex is shut down and offline. But when we do have good levels of well-being, the opposite is true. Our prefrontal cortex comes back online and can work and learn effectively. Our memory can work effectively. Neurogenesis can occur. We can get new brain cells. And cortisol is not pumping through our body, but instead we have the release of a number of feel-good, beneficial chemicals flooding through our brain and our body. So how do we make sure that on a daily basis we do have good levels of well-being, giving us the best chance to take full benefit and full advantage of our neuroplastic properties of our brain? By taking a happy, healthy and holistic approach to our everyday life. So we're going to cover these 10 things tonight. We won't be doing it in a lot of detail that we normally do in our workshops simply due to lack of time, but it's important to realise that these happy, healthy and holistic choices that you make really do improve the well-being of your brain, and in doing so, the neuroplastic potential you have. But we first need a summary of what neuroplasticity really is, and this is again the same way that I teach students. So we need to first realise we are the driver and the mechanic of the most powerful engine in the world, our brain. Our brain is not a fixed organ. It's not like the colour of our eyes or our height, which we cannot change. Our intelligence level or potential is not determined at birth. It's not determined when we finish school or childhood. In fact, we can change our brain our entire life if we want to. Our neuroplastic brain is malleable. It's capable of rewiring itself. It can repair itself. It's retrainable. And most amazing of all, it changes physically due to our thoughts. And since we can be in control of our thoughts, it means we can be in control of our brain. So this is a neuron, a brain cell. You have about 86 billion of these microscopic neurons in your brain. They have branches. Many dendrite branches and an axon with lots of axon terminals. These branches from neurons reach out and connect with branches from other neurons to form massive pathways, complex pathways throughout your brain. The branches from an axon branch reaches out and connects with a dendrite branch, but they do not touch. There is always a little gap in between them, and that gap is traversed by electrical impulses or electrical signals that travel from axon to dendrite, from branch to branch of your neurons through complex pathways. And this happens millions of times every single second, and it has to for us to be alive, and it's been going on since before you were a baby. So the first time that you learn something, and this could be your 5 times tables or tying your shoes, a pathway is being made in your brain between the branches of your neurons. And the more times that you repeat or practice that thing over and over. So the more times you tie your shoes or practice your 5 times table, that pathway that the electrical impulses are traveling through increases. It gets more well worn, and it is stronger, and it's faster for the electrical impulses to travel between those neurons in that pathway. And this is due to a process called myelination, where sort of a fatty sheath coats the branches, coats your neurons' branches, allowing the electrical impulses to travel down them faster and faster the more times that what you're doing is repeated, until you've repeated things so many times that you have a superhighway through your brain. And when this happens, the electrical impulses can travel so fast that you're able to answer questions like 6, 5, 30, and you can answer things quicker than you can really think about them, because that pathway has been traveled so many times by electrical impulses. Now, the opposite is true as well. If you stop repeating and practicing something, even if it was a superhighway through your brain, eventually, so to speak, the weeds in the forest will reclaim that pathway, and it will be slower for the electricity or the electrical impulses to find the pathway through your brain. So this is what neuroscientists mean when they talk about neurons that fire together, wire together. And the really good thing is that neuroplasticity works for everyone. It works even when the usual pathways are damaged and no longer open. And it's very much like driving a pathway or a route from point A to point B. If you're driving along a certain route or pathway and that pathway is blocked for some reason, you don't just sit there. You find a different pathway or a different route to take to help you get to your original destination. And it's the exact same thing in our brain. And there are some astonishing stories I can tell you. When I explained neuroplasticity at a school workshop I was at, a teacher came up to me and she shared with me this true story about someone that she knows, which I'm going to share with you now. So in a hospital here in Australia, there was a baby boy born called Bob. Now, Bob was missing the entire language part of his brain. So the doctors told his mum when he was born that he would never be able to read or speak or understand the written or the English language like normal children. But Bob's mum was a teacher and she had different ideas. So from the time Bob was a baby, from the time he was born, she spoke to him and read to him and immersed him in the English language. By the time he was old enough to see, she was showing him letters and words and reading to him. She literally immersed him in the English language. Bob is now a Year 3 student and he can read, write, speak, talk just like an average student. And that is the power of neuroplasticity. Bob literally doesn't even have the language part of his brain. And yet he's an average, completely normal student in all areas of language. But it is not enough to know that neuroplasticity exists and that it's possible. If we want to fully harness and take advantage of the immense power and potential of neuroplasticity in our brains, we first have to make sure we have good levels of well-being. And to illustrate this vividly, I'm going to tell you a true story about a young man who is listening and watching this right now from Pakistan. And he's asked me to share this story with you in the hope that it will inspire others. His name is Shaquille. And a few weeks ago, in the Neuroscience Facebook group that many of you belong, he posted this post. Hello everyone, hope you are fine. Is it possible to improve brain performance, memory and learning after you're 25 years of age? If yes, how much? And please tell me the procedure according to the latest research on the brain. Your response will be appreciated. So I commented and said, absolutely it's possible. We can improve our brain performance, memory and learning our entire lives if we want to. And I gave him a few pointers for how to do this by taking a happy, healthy and holistic approach. He then contacted me personally, and over the last few weeks I've been working with him to help him take a more happy, healthy and holistic approach to his life to improve his well-being. But to understand why this is so important, we need to understand Shaquille's story, which he wants me to tell you today. So, in Pakistan, when Shaquille was 5, his father died. which put an immense amount of pressure on Shaquille to do really well at school because he had to be the breadwinner and provider for his now elderly mother and 2 sisters. But Shaquille was diagnosed by doctors with ADD. He found it extremely hard to read and see what was happening at school, and he didn't know a single sentence of English until he was 14 years of age. He calls himself, as do everyone who knows him, a slow learner. And yet Shaquille persevered throughout school and put in 15-hour study days to graduate with straight A's at the second top of his class. He has graduated in physics and maths at university and is now a secondary school teacher, and in his secondary teaching screening test, he got the top score, despite the disadvantages that his brain had given him. However, what he's now in contact with me for is because on a daily basis, he feels anxious. He fears for the future, and he feels depressed and at times, sometimes even suicidal. This is why, if we want to take full advantage of the neuroplastic properties of our brain, we need to first have good levels of well-being. Because Shaquille is so often anxious and fearful and depressed, his amygdala is on every day, which literally means his prefrontal cortex, the part that he needs for brain performance, memory and learning, is largely offline and shutting down. So we've been talking about taking a happy, healthy, holistic approach in his life to improve his levels of well-being, and it's working, because now, after just a couple of weeks, he's telling me often that he's in a good mood and he feels motivated and encouraged to take control of his life and improve his levels of well-being. So, how is he doing this? Every day he's doing things like meditating, getting physical exercise, getting outside in nature and sunshine, changing his thoughts and doing positive affirmations. He's doing the happy, healthy and holistic 10 points that you can see on the screen now. So very quickly, I'll be touching on these and how you can use these 10 points in your everyday life to improve your brain health and cognitive performance. So music, when we listen to music, it releases dopamine, the brain chemical dopamine. Dopamine makes us feel really good, but it's also the best neurotransmitter you can have for learning, for taking the message from one neuron branch across the gap or the synapse to another neuron branch. Plus, when we listen to music, guess what else happens? Our amygdala starts to shut down, meaning our prefrontal cortex can come back online and we can learn effectively. We talked about the branches of the neurons reaching out with that gap in the middle. Now, the electrical impulses, electrical signals for anything cannot travel across that gap without the help of neurotransmitters, of which dopamine is one, to transmit the electrical signal through the brain across those gaps. Now, we can run out of neurotransmitters, and that's when we find it hard to do academic or cognitive work. But when we move, when we get up and move, within just 30 seconds of moving, we get different neurotransmitters flooding through our brain, including those feel-good ones like dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. Plus, what else happens when we move? We breathe in oxygen, and our brain needs and uses 20% of all the oxygen that we breathe in. Plus, when we move, we increase our chances of neurogenesis, of getting new brain cells and increasing our cognitive reserve. And our hippocampus, the memory part of our brain, is working effectively, more effectively when we're exercising and moving. So every day we should be moving, but not in the same repetitive way, in lots of different ways. That's why dancing and swimming and learning new skills and new sports or different ways of moving is so beneficial for neuroplasticity. Exercise is literally like fertilizer for the brain. It really does help it grow. Exercise has even been proven to be as efficient as antidepressant medication. Here is a very visual way of understanding the power of moving more in our everyday lives. On the left, we have the brains of students who were told to sit still and then do a test. On the right, we have the brains of students who were told to go outside for a walk for 20 minutes and don't stop moving, then come in and do the same test. The red and the orange in the brains of the students who went walking represent more electrical activity between the neurons. They're the ones who did better on the test because they were moving and they had a flood of neurotransmitters and oxygen. When we do things in our life that make us happy, that make us laugh, that make us smile, things that are fun, this improves obviously our mental well-being, but also our brain health and brain cognitive performance. Because when we do things that we find fun and we laugh and we smile, we release that feel-good chemical dopamine, which of course makes us feel even happier, but is also the best neurotransmitter to have for cognitive learning. It acts like the save button, and if we have dopamine whilst we're learning something, it helps to save that information we're learning into long-term storage. It's really important to be mindful, be present in the moment, to practice things like deep, concentrated breathing, yoga, and meditation, because these things help us to stress less and deactivate that amygdala, focus better, they improve our memory and learning and decision making, they make us feel happier, and they help us to relax. Plus, remember, breathing. Our brain uses 20% of all the oxygen that we inhale. When we get outside in nature, get outdoors, get some sunshine, be amongst the forest, the plants and the trees and the gardens outside, we have less negative thoughts, better problem-solving abilities, better creative thinking, our memory improves and it's easier for us to focus, plus it reduces the amount of cortisol, that stress hormone that we have in our body. To demonstrate how powerful and important it is that we recognize thoughts and how they impact our neuroplastic potential, we need to realize how humans are like icebergs. Icebergs in the sense that when something happens, the only part of a human that we see is their behavior, the part that's above the waterline, the part that's visible to others. But we behave the way we do because of how we feel, because of our emotions. That's inside our mind or below the waterline. And we have emotions or feelings because of our thoughts, the thoughts that we choose about something that happens, an event that happens. And when we realize that we are in control of our thoughts, we can change our thoughts and choose them. There's lots of ways that we teach that are really simple and powerful to do this. When we notice our thoughts and then change them, we change our feelings, we change our emotions, and therefore our behavior. And our behavior, of course, has results and consequences. Plus, it's really important we do change our thoughts, because then our feelings change, and no matter what emotion we have, in our brain, it is assembled, or our brain assembles lots of different chemicals for every emotion that we experience that then flood throughout our body in our bloodstream, locking into every single cell in our body. So quite literally, the emotions are experienced in our whole body. And that's why taking control of our thoughts is so important. It literally affects how we feel and the emotions we experience in our life. Plus, when we practice grateful thoughts and we have an attitude of gratitude, that leads to us being mentally healthier and happier. And an attitude of gratitude, realizing and thinking about things we're thankful for having in our lives, activates that prefrontal cortex. Plus, when we have compassionate thoughts, that increases our gamma waves. And gamma waves are considered the brain's optimal frequency of functioning. They have even done studies with lifetime meditators and proven that when they do deep, compassionate meditative practices, their gamma waves don't increase just a little bit, their gamma waves increase 800% when they have those deep, compassionate thoughts. Food. The food that we put into our mouth is the fuel for our brain. And just like if you put the wrong fuel into a vehicle or a car, you will have less than optimal performance with that vehicle. The same is true for your brain. If you put the wrong food into your stomach, you will have less than optimal brain performance. Food affects our mood. It is well known that if we consume a diet high in sugary, processed, refined foods, it increases symptoms of anxiety, depression, and poor mental health. Conversely, if we eat a diet that is rich in whole foods, lots of fruits and vegetables, and unprocessed, unrefined grains, legumes, and so on, we radically improve our mood, and the cognitive performance of our brain. In societies where humans generally live to 100, healthy, both mentally and physically, they do not eat refined, sugary, processed foods, which are a staple in the Western diet. Instead, they eat unprocessed, whole foods, very little meat and dairy, and it means they have a 25 to 35% decreased risk in getting dementia. Our gut is literally our second brain. It's called our second brain. It's connected to our brain by our vagus nerve, and the brain and the gut do talk to each other. Communication goes both ways. For every one human cell you have in your body, you have 10 microbes, and most of them are in your gut. And they affect your mood, and they are affected by the foods that you put into your mouth. Serotonin, a neurotransmitter, it regulates our mood, and 95% of the serotonin we have in our body is produced in our gut. So we really need to take care. We really need to take care of what we eat. Friendships. Good connections and social support can improve health and increase longevity. Brain function declines if we are isolated and lonely. So having a really good network of people you trust, who can support you, who help you to be happy, is really important. And to finish with sleep. Sleep is oh so powerful. Sleep is a human biological necessity. We have to do it. So, for a few reasons. When we are asleep, in deep sleep, the cerebral spinal fluid that sloshes around our brain, acting like a cushion to help protect our sensitive brain in cases of head injury, actually acts like a cleaning system. And it goes around our brain and it cleans up the toxic waste products that are produced and given off by our neurons throughout the day when they give off electrical impulses. Now, if these toxic waste products from the neurons are left to sit around our brain for too long because we don't get enough adequate deep sleep to clean them up, it radically increases our risk of getting things like Parkinson's and dementia. And that cleaning system is 60% more efficient at night when we have a deep level of sleep. Plus, when we are asleep, the information that we've learned during the day in our prefrontal cortex is sent through our hippocampus, the memory part of our brain, and sent somewhere in our brain to be stored for long-term memory. If we do not get a good enough level of sleep for enough hours at night, that consolidation transfer process for our memories does not happen, and we lose a lot of the memories that we were meant to learn that day. Plus, when we sleep, our tissues and cells regenerate and heal. And of course, when we sleep, it improves our happiness, our mood, our mental well-being. We all know that's the case. And to come full circle back to where I started, when we get a good level of sleep and we're not tired the next morning, our amygdala does not need to turn on. When our amygdala is not on, our prefrontal cortex is online, and we are able to perform effectively. We are able to learn effectively. So there you have it. Taking a happy, healthy, and holistic approach to our lives obviously increases our mental well-being and happiness and health of our whole body and our brain, but it also increases the chances of us being able to harness and take full advantage of the immense power and potential of neuroplasticity in our brains. Hopefully, I've shown that it can often be simpler and a whole lot more fun than you may think to improve your cognitive brain performance and brain health by taking a happy, healthy, and holistic evidence-based approach to your life every day. So, if you are like Shaquille and you want to improve your brain performance, your memory, your learning, your well-being, happiness, and overall health, it is possible. It is possible to achieve your dreams despite your past or present circumstances. Your future is literally in your own hands, and neuroplasticity makes it possible for you to achieve your goals. So, if you are interested in taking a happy, healthy, holistic approach to your life to improve your well-being, your happiness, your brain health, and your brain cognitive performance, We offer a 21-day happy, healthy, holistic program. It's an online program, can be done from anywhere in the world. You change your brain, you change your life. There is the website if anyone's interested. Now, normally, our face-to-face workshops that we run can cost up to $1,500. This standard price for this happy, healthy, holistic 21-day program is $127. But what we're doing tonight, for everyone listening and only the people listening to this webinar, we've got a discount code. We're very genuine and sincere in wanting to help people reach their true potential and lead a happy, healthy, successful and satisfied life. So if you are watching this and you're interested in this program, head to that website. The discount code is webinar 2020, and you can do the entire 21-day happy, healthy, holistic program to change your brain, to change your life for just $87. If any of you are particularly interested in linking brain science to education and the work and workshops that I offer for making that link between teaching and learning and neuroscience, then you will want to go to our face-to-face workshop page, which is abovebeyondeducation.com. So that is all from me, and it's over to you for any questions anyone has.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it was a very complete presentation in terms of the holistic approach that we should take for neuroplasticity. Now we are open for the Q&A session. So if anybody is having any questions, they can ask directly. They can raise the hand and I'll just unmute them. We have first question from Naya Qureshi. We'll be unmuting her and she can ask the question.
Okay, go for it.
Hi there, Tammy. I'm sorry, everybody, I had to leave. I've missed the middle of this webinar, so hopefully I'll catch it later. So I've come in and caught you, Tammy. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I've just got a question with regards to children. Children say the funniest things. You know, they come out with all sorts. So what is the craziest, funniest thing a child's ever said to you about their brain?
Oh, goodness me. That makes me think. Oh, so many things. It will probably be something to do with, one of them that comes to mind is when the students are in the class and they're learning and then making mistakes or finding something really, really challenging, and they might say out loud, oh, I can't do this. I'm just going to give up. I can't do it. And then at one time, all of the other students, without even looking up or taking their pen off the page, all chorused together, "You can't do this yet. Keep trying."
Oh, bless. And thank you. And may I ask, this course that you mentioned, the Mind, is it the Mind Brain School? Is it suitable for children? So, for instance, if I wanted to buy it for my niece to do, is it suitable for children, or is it better, more aimed at adults?
Yeah, the 21-day happy, healthy, holistic program is for adults, so 16 and over. However, on that website, so the mindbrainschool.com.au, if you get rid of the / and everything after that, there are some online courses, and one in particular is perfect for children from the age of 6 to the age of 12. And it's called Manage My Emotions Now, and it teaches them all about their brain in much the same sort of, very visual, exciting way. We do all sorts of things, yoga, meditations, lots of drawing, lots of music. So that's perfect.
Oh, that sounds great. They need something, I think, during this time.
Yeah,
and, I think that would be great to treat them.
Yeah, absolutely. The feedback we had just the other day from a parent who's done it, whose little girl was having extreme emotional outbursts, getting really angry and not understanding, simply saying something wrong with my brain, and she did it, and they've changed their whole bedrooms to suit all the strategies we gave. They're practicing them all, and that she can't speak highly enough of it. So it's really rewarding when we get feedback.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tammy. I'll definitely have a look. Thanks again.
Thanks very much for your question.
Okay.
No questions too big or too small. Go for it. Can be about.
So I have a question. Like, does this program also tells how to deal with the student who is more kind of distractive throughout the class?
Okay, that's a good question. So the 21-day happy, healthy, holistic program is not designed solely with teaching or educators in mind. This is simply one for any person, whether they're an adult student, whether they're a business person, whether they're a parent, to take control and improve their well-being, their brain health, their brain cognitive performance. So it's not specifically focused on teaching, and it's not specifically, certainly not specifically for teachers, but a part of it is certainly how to improve that cognitive brain performance, which then translates into, of course, improving teaching if you're a teacher, or improving your work at a business if you're a business person, or improving how you manage your own life if you're a parent and deal with your children as well.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, hello.
Okay, my name is Manuel Alvarado. I'm a neurosurgeon from Venezuela. I work a lot with children with brain tumors and other issues. And of course, they have some cognitive problems. One of the questions you already answered me. This program is not for training children, only adults. Is that true?
Correct. The one for children to take control of their emotions is called Manage My Emotions Now, and that's on the mindbrainschool.com.au homepage, so without the / happy, healthy, holistic. That's specifically for students ages 6 to 12. And the 21-day Happy, Healthy, Holistic program is for adults, both from a well-being brain health point of view and also a cognitive sort of academic performance point of view as well, correct?
Okay, the other question is, have you ever thought of putting up this program in developing countries?
I would absolutely love to. I think it would really benefit students in developing countries. I have approached the Australian government here with a proposal to take it sort of a roadshow around the country to Indigenous communities, because they really would benefit, the science is clear, from knowing how to take control of their own life and realise that despite their current or past circumstances, they can grow their brain and achieve cognitively and in health as well in their life. I mean, there's even some studies that have been done in third world developing countries that point to the fact that when parents in developing countries understand neuroscience and how their children's brains work and learn best, even if they don't have good levels of education or intelligence, if you want, themselves as parents, with that understanding of what they can do practically and simply based on neuroscience to improve their own children's potential intellectually and from a wellbeing point of view, in a few generations they are able to actually lift whole societies out of poverty. And that's really quite profound and powerful. So absolutely, I would love to be able to do that.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Very helpful.
Much. Thank you. Gracias.
A la orden.
I think that's all for today. We don't have any more questions now. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Ms. Tammy, for having this presentation. And I hope that more and more people will sign up for this program. And if we have any other queries, we can directly send you an email, and maybe you can reply later on.
Absolutely. There's a place to contact us on both websites, mindbrainschool.com.au, which is more of our online course website, and then abovebeyondeducation.com, which is for our face-to-face workshops in the education arena, but you can contact us on either websites.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and I hope that we may continue this webinar on some other topics, so that during these days we can come up with learning some new ideas and new studies, whatever going on in the field of neuroscience. So thank you so much for joining us today, and stay safe, stay happy.
Thank you very much for organising it.